We're going to speak now, though, about free speech. Jasper Hamill is here, tech journalist, because guess what? Mark Zuckerberg has finally seen the light. Mark Zuckerberg finally announced yesterday that they were going to do away with censorship on Facebook and on Meta, and that basically they were going to be much, much more lenient on people who posted things which might previously have been taken down by Facebook, because we might remember, particularly during COVID, they were really, really gargantuan and overwhelmingly draconian to people who put out. I mean, I remember I used to put out clips of myself talking to Peter Hitchens, and they would put, you know, sort of community notes on it saying, you know, some of the content in this interview may not be correct or may not be accurate. And I was like, how dare you? You know, we're talking about things that we know about, and we shouldn't be having to be treated like that. But let's have a look at what Mark Zuckerberg has said about free speech.
We're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US.
Starting in the US, but also, he says, they're going to be looking at making sure that other countries around the world, which are much, much more, shall we say, draconian about free speech, will not be entertained. Let's find out what it all means. Jasper's here. Jasper, very good morning to you.
Morning.
I see that this has caused a bit of dismay at The Guardian, front page of The Guardian today. So it's dismay as fact-checking ditched on Facebook in free speech drive, which I thought was slightly ironic coming from them.
Absolutely. Well, I guess until yesterday, you would associate Meta with kind of being a left-wing censorship zone in many ways. It censored vaccine content. It's famously involved in throttling the Hunter Biden laptop story, until this kind of dramatic Damascene moment from Mark Zuckerberg, who's been having a kind of what looks a bit like a midlife crisis, but I guess more favourably called a rebrand, and is kind of branding himself as an all-American hero and a great defender of free speech, just in time, of course, for Donald Trump coming in. And this is a dramatic about turn. So the censorship is lifted. There's going to be much more freedom of speech. They're moving their censorship team from California to Texas, which is deemed to be a less biased zone, although it might just be a kind of bias. So this is a huge change for Facebook, and I think probably very welcome.
Yeah, I think it will be. And it's interesting, isn't it, how immediately that Donald Trump is about to become president, that this kind of thing happens. And he's made some interesting comments as well about some countries, particularly European countries, where free speech is not quite as well regarded, perhaps, as it is in the US. And so he's kind of rubbing up against Keir Starmer here, isn't he, on the online safety bill?
I'm afraid he specifically called out the EU as a place where there were controls on free speech. But of course, you know, you cannot help but see the sort of dark shadow of Keir Starmer lurking behind that statement. And I think we're really on a collision course. It's kind of alarming, I think, really, living here in Britain. I mean, we seem to be a bit of an outlier. So America's moving back towards freedom of speech. There seems to be a kind of push internally, certainly within the EU, and meanwhile, you know, are we going to be supporting free speech here in Britain? It seems unlikely. But yeah, if Zuckerberg's on a collision course with Starmer, Musk has already collided, and now I guess we have to see what Trump is going to do. You know, is he going to continue on with this kind of anti-Starmer, anti-Labour, anti-left rhetoric, which could be really dreadful for our country? It's kind of quite worrying, really. Or are we going to move to accommodate this new reality, which seems unlikely? It's kind of an uncertain, slightly scary situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because, I mean, Britain's always been behind America when it comes to free speech. And even before Meta existed, before social media existed, you know, the rules of what you could get away with saying in the UK and the US were always very, very different. And I always used to say that to people. You know, I spent 10 years working in journalism in America, and some of the stuff that we were able to access, some of the information that we were able to get out of, for example, you know, the FBI or even politicians and big companies was extraordinary. We couldn't quite believe our luck. You know, we went over to work there. Like, blimey, in Britain you just get told, no, we can't tell you that, whereas over there they tell you everything.
Absolutely. They really do take their free speech protection seriously, and here we've got such strong libel and defamation laws that certainly being a journalist can be a bit of a nail-biting experience, but America is far ahead. But they were pulling back those freedoms, certainly under the Biden administration, and Zuckerberg in this case specifically called out the previous administration. He said there was political pressure, and I paraphrase that. He said there was, you know, political pressure to impose censorship, and certainly under Biden and under Harris, we saw more calls for controls on freedom of speech. So really, this is a kind of a course correction with Trump. You know, they're making America great again, but they're making it renewing its commitment to free speech, which was dying on the vine a little bit. So I think it's interesting times.
And it is interesting because I'm reading in the Guardian's piece that Trump and Zuckerberg have often had a roller coaster relationship. Trump threatened to jail him at one point if he interfered in the election, but then they had dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and now Zuckerberg apparently has donated $1 million to his inauguration fund. So I mean, he's really done an absolute volte-face, hasn't he? He's also now hired Dana White, the chief executive of the UFC, who's a prominent Trump supporter, to sit on the board of Meta.
Yeah, this is a huge change, but a lot of big tech billionaires have made this kind of about face. Musk himself 2 years ago was saying he was, you know, I paraphrase again, was fed up with Trump, and it's time for him to step aside. Now, of course, he's buddies. He's living on a cottage on the grounds of Mar-a-Lago. Jeff Bezos was in town in Mar-a-Lago to visit him recently. We're seeing huge changes, and I wonder how much of it is opportunism and how much of it is a genuine commitment to kind of American values. You know, it's easy to be cynical, but how much more money does Zuckerberg, Musk, and Bezos really need? I find maybe there is a kind of libertarian streak in Silicon Valley. We forget this. I mean,
there should be, really. I mean, that's why I was always surprised that they were willing to kind of bend to the will of the White House, because we know from the whole Biden escapade, as you say, that it was Joe Biden's administration who kind of leaned on them and said, you know, would you mind suppressing this for us? That would be very helpful. And they went ahead and did it, which you would have thought would never happen to these so-called kind of, you know, free speech absolutists.
No, it was a very worrying time, actually, because I guess the human mind, we tend to err towards steady states. We think that what's happening now is going to happen forever. And it was easy to see that kind of clampdown on freedom of speech was going to be permanent. It was far from clear that Trump was going to get in. And it was very surprising to see the billionaires and even the ordinary people of Silicon Valley about this censorship. And so many of their internal staff, of course, were taking part in the censorship. You look at Twitter, for instance, before Musk got in, they had vast numbers of kind of purple-haired folks sitting there just judging what was acceptable, what was not, booting people off, limiting their freedom of speech.
Exactly right. Yeah, so it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Jasper, good to talk to you. Thanks. We've got to run. Jasper Hamill, their tech journalist. Let's see whether Donald Trump thinks he's responsible for all of this.
I think they've come a long way. Meta. Facebook. I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive. I watched it. Actually, I watched it on Fox. I'm not allowed to say that. Say it?
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past? With
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Meta. That's it. Meta. I can't wait for Donald Trump to be president. I don't know about you.